Hello and welcome to Chapter 4 of Small Business Management, Franchises and Buyouts of Existing Businesses. If you remember from the last recording, I talked about 3 ways that you can start a business. You can start a business from scratch, you can purchase a franchise, or you can purchase an existing business. So in this chapter, we're going to talk about the latter 2 and describe what all the details regarding them. Here are the learning goals for the chapter. And so what is a franchise? Well, basically franchising involves someone who's created a business, and usually what happens is they want to expand. They have a really good business going on, but they'd love to expand, and in order to do that, though, they need a lot of capital. And the quickest way to expand a successful business is through franchising. Now, franchising is not cheap. There's a lot of legal ramifications that occur when you want to franchise. So it is expensive, but it's not as expensive as expanding into multiple units. So what the franchisor will do, the original business owner will license out and sell rights to their brand name and or products to other parties. And these people who purchase these franchises are known as franchisees. And they buy the right to the business and to the name, and they run that business according to the franchisor's strict policies and requirements. And it costs them money, obviously, and it limits their power because they're only allowed to sell and market what the franchisor says in most instances. Hobbytown USA is a franchise that I was very seriously considering purchasing some years ago before I opened up my medical equipment company. And Hobbytown USA, the nearest one, is located in the Pittsburgh area near the airport. And what Hobbytown USA does, they're based out of Oklahoma. They will run a financial background check on the person who's interested in purchasing it. And if they qualify, they will set up an agreement to purchase the Hobbytown USA franchise and located in a certain area that is approved by the franchisor. So Morgantown was approved by Hobbytown USA. It wasn't approved for a large store, but it was approved for a medium-sized store. They selected the location, which I was not in agreement with, and that's basically what broke down the negotiations. But Hobbytown USA is a viable franchise, and I'll refer to them as we go through the chapter. There are lots of options when you're looking at franchising. So there's different types of franchising arrangements, and we're going to go over all 8 of these in the next few slides. Product and trade name franchising. This is where the franchisor would sell the rights of the product or product trademark to a franchisee. The one thing about this type of franchise is that the franchisee doesn't necessarily have to limit themselves to just the franchisor's products. So for example, True Value hardware stores, they do sell branded True Value hardware products, but the franchisee is also free, has the freedom to pull in other products that are not True Value hardware. But the True Value hardware name is trusted and is a well-known brand, so it's very valuable for the franchisee to have that name on their store, and it draws in customers because of that brand name. True Value also supports them through nationwide advertising and events. Western Auto is another example of that. Another form of franchising is business format franchising, and this is a very popular one that most of us are familiar with. But a Hardee's, a McDonald's, the Hobbytown USA that I just mentioned, those are business format franchises where the franchisor basically provides everything from site location to the products to the training, support, financial assistance, advertising. And in these types of franchises, the franchisee is not at liberty to bring in other products or to build their store according to their own specifications. This type of franchising has a lot of control by the franchisor, and it's one of the most common types of franchises that we know. Hardee's and McDonald's, Hobbytown USA, obviously, are all examples of this. Between these two types of franchises, the business format and the product and trade name, this is probably makes up about 75 to 80% of all franchises. These two are the most popular. A master licensee is just someone who basically works for the franchisor and goes out and tries to sell franchises in a certain area, a certain specified territory. A multiple unit ownership is a franchisee who owns multiple units. They basically have several different locations. So the Subway franchise is a very good example of this. Perhaps within a given territory, a franchisee may own 2 or 3 Subway locations. Area developers is very similar to the multiple unit ownership, but area developers are individuals or companies that have the legal right to open several outlets in a given area. Applebee's would be an example. The Applebee's that you may be familiar with in Fairmont is owned by an area developer, I believe, out of Charleston, West Virginia. The one in Morgantown, West Virginia is owned by an area developer out of Pittsburgh, where they have a certain specified territory and they own multiple units or have the rights to open multiple units within those areas. Piggyback franchising is something you're probably familiar with or may not even known it, but this is where an operation of a franchise is within the physical facilities of another business so that they can have a captivated audience or a captivated customer base. So if you ever go into the Walmart in Fairmont, I believe there's a Subway within that Walmart. That's a piggyback franchise. Product distribution franchising is where the franchisee purchases license basically for the brand name, and that's really what they're after. So a gasoline dealer or gasoline station owner might purchase the product distribution franchise of Exxon. It doesn't really necessarily mean that the gasoline is directly from Exxon, although it probably has to meet certain specifications. But the Exxon name is very familiar to customers, and they have their own credit card established. So a lot of travelers will have an Exxon card, and that's very beneficial to local independent gasoline station owners who have the Exxon name. So that's a very popular one as well. Multi-brand franchising is basically the franchisee has several franchises under one corporate structure. I don't know if you've ever been to a gasoline station that maybe inside has a Dairy Queen, a Tim Hortons Donuts, and maybe a Little Caesars Pizza. That would be multi-brand franchising. Co-branding brings 2 franchise brands together under one owner. So it's very similar to multi-brand. And actually, this would be, they'd almost be synonymous with each other. Oh, another example of co-branding, although I don't have it listed here, would be like the Long John Silver's and A&W Root Beer locations. So that gives you a sort of an idea and a lot of good examples of all the different types of franchises that are out there. So what are some of the pros and cons of franchising? Well, the biggest plus on the franchising side is the probability of success. When you buy a franchise, you are buying a proven, successful business model. And that brand name is automatically going to give you an advantage in the marketplace. Also, usually franchisors will pre-qualify franchisees based on their ability and their financial status. So they're not going to actually grant a franchise to a franchisee who's not doesn't have the financial ability or capability of keeping that business afloat. So they automatically know exactly how much net worth a franchisee should have in order to successfully run a franchise. They give training support, sometimes right on site. Hobbytown USA was going to bring in personnel to help run the store and train me for 6 weeks from the opening day. So that training is very vital. Some of them offer financial assistance or loans, whereas maybe a franchisee might not be able to get a bank loan for a franchise. The franchise itself may loan the money. The franchisor may loan the money. And there's lots of operating benefits. They give you manuals and training policies and everything that you need. It's almost like a cookie cutter type of operation to help you run this business. And that's good franchises. There's some bad franchises out there that don't do hardly any of this. So what are some of the downfalls or disadvantages of franchising? Well, one is the cost. It is very expensive. It's much more expensive to purchase a franchise than it would be to open up from scratch, but it's much quicker. But you have the initial franchise fee, possibly property investment cost or inventory cost. You have royalty payments, so not only do you have to pay the franchise fee up front, but you pay an annual royalty, usually on net sales. You have advertising cost, which is a disadvantage, but it's also an advantage because you get the luxury of national advertising. If you think of Papa John's Pizza during the Super Bowl, they advertise for their outlets. Can you imagine if one business owner had to pay for a commercial during the Super Bowl? Well, they just couldn't do it. It's millions and millions of dollars per 30 seconds. Here, Papa John's does it with the money they collect from all their franchisees, and their franchisees benefit from that exponentially. There's lots of restrictions on the business operations from the franchisors, so the owners or the franchisees actually lose some owner control. And so that is a lot of people go into business so they can be their own boss, but in turn, by buying a franchise, they actually lose some control because they have to adhere to the strict guidelines that the franchisor sets upon them. And then sometimes you can just buy into a bad franchise. It's not as it doesn't happen as much today because of regulations from the Federal Trade Commission, which we'll go over in a minute. But a lot of times smaller franchises may not give you the support that you expected. So here's some additional advantages of the franchise model. Some of these we've already talked about, but because you're getting a proven line of success, you get a reduced risk of failure. You can use that valuable trade name and trademark, and you get access to that proven business system that's already in place. You don't have to create it yourself. The training that the franchisor gives is an advantage. You get an immediate supply line and purchasing power. So can you imagine, as just an independent small business, you have virtually no purchasing power from your vendors. But if you're a franchisee, in other words, you own a franchise, you get the purchasing power of that entire franchise, which could be huge. It's in a way for an existing business to diversify. So the small gasoline stations where you see the multiple franchises within them, they don't have to rely just on their gasoline sales. The biggest part of their business is probably the sales from the franchises within the convenience store and financial support, which we talked about. So there's also obviously concerns about franchises that you have to be aware of. Not as much today as it was maybe 20 years ago when a lot of people were getting ripped off by franchisors. And the two main ones that I want you to know are the churning and the encroachment. So churning is where some franchises would be terminated by the franchisor for no reason other than the ability of the franchisor to sell another franchise. So let me give you an example because that really sounds confusing even to me. Let's say I owned a franchise of ABC Company, and my franchise was in Morgantown, West Virginia. And I was very successful, and I did everything by the book, and ABC was happy with me. But all of a sudden, one day, I get a letter or an email saying they are terminating their agreement. And I can't understand why, because I've been the perfect franchisee and I've been very successful. But anyway, they actually terminate my franchise, and I can no longer be a franchise of the ABC franchise. And the only reason they did that is so that they could go out and collect franchise fees and royalties from another new franchise. So they sell another franchise in Morgantown just so that they can keep on doing this, because when you sell them, that's where the biggest money comes into the franchise with the franchise fee. Usually there's franchise fees of anywhere between $1,000 to $1 million. So churning these out to just resell it over and over and over is called churning. Encroachment is where they illegally place other franchises close to your franchise so that it hurts your business. Today, that's no longer the case that often, because there are guidelines. When you buy a franchise, you also buy that area, and it guarantees that the franchisor will not place another unit close to you. So for instance, Hobbytown USA was giving me the North Central West Virginia area. In other words, they would not sell another franchise within 90 square miles in a 90-mile radius of the North Central West Virginia area. The closest one was going to be in Pittsburgh. And so they went from Clarksburg was the center, although I was going to locate it in Morgantown. Clarksburg was the center of the territory and 90 miles around that. And it butted right up against the one in Pittsburgh. But nevertheless, I had that protected area, and there was no chance of encroachment. But as you can see, there's lots of different things that you need to be aware of when you're looking at or evaluating a franchise. Obviously, there's controls that the franchisor has over the franchisee, limited sales territories, sometimes requiring the site approval. And that was my biggest gripe with Hobbytown USA, is they insisted that my store be located in the Suncrest Town Center. However, the rent at the Suncrest Town Center was close to $5,000 a month for 1,700 square feet. And I felt that that was way too much rent that I'd have to be paying. I'd have to sell a lot of model airplanes just to make the rent, and I didn't think I could survive there. And that was the straw that broke the camel's back on that deal. Imposing requirements on outlet appearance. Obviously, all Pizza Huts, all Subways, all McDonald's, they all look relatively the same. So that's a control that a franchise has on their franchisees. Limiting the goods and services offered for sale. We've already talked about that. Limiting advertising and hours of operation. I talked about advertising being an advantage, but one of the disadvantages would be that independent franchises really can't do their own advertising unless they get the approval from the franchisor. So limited advertising and hours of operation are usually controlled by the franchisor. When we're evaluating these opportunities, and there's thousands of different types of franchises, some that are very, very, very inexpensive to purchase. But how do we evaluate them? Well, personal observation. Some franchises advertise trying to sell. You can also go to third-party sources. Go to the internet. There's consultants or brokers. Go to the FTC website and look it up. Here are just some franchise listings that I found in a book that I usually buy called a franchise. It's just a franchise magazine, and they will have all this type of information in it. Here is, and I have a range of cost or priced franchises. This one has a franchise fee of just $1,000. Capital requirements of only $100. So if you're worth $100 and you can pay the franchise fee, you can buy a Heavenly Gold Card franchise. And what a Heavenly Gold Card franchise is, it's a fundraising business for nonprofits where they sell these cards You've probably seen them before. Maybe you've even sold them through your high school band or athletic department. And it's just a card that has a bunch of coupons on it. 10% off at Subway, 10% off at Taco Bell, or whatever. And these cards, that comes from a franchisor. And Heavenly Gold Card is just one of many that are out there. But it gives you where they're located, who the sales manager is, gives you the phone number, contact information, and so forth. Here's one from a company called Different Twist Pretzel Company. And here you can see where capital requirements are a little bit higher. And here's Hardee's, where you can see you need $1 million net worth, $300 liquid capital per restaurant. The franchise fee is $25,000 to $35,000. So it's very expensive. But, we showed 2 or 3 examples there that give you a wide range of cost. You can go to the franchisors themselves. When I was looking at the Hobbytown USA, I actually went to the franchise, one of the franchises in Pittsburgh, and looked around. And then I went to the franchisors themselves out of Oklahoma and talked to them online and got a lot of information. They even once they ran a background check, financial background check on me, they gave me a disclosure document, which I'll talk about in a second. Well, I'll talk about that now. Because of all the problems 20 years or 30 years ago that consumers or potential franchisees were having with franchisors and getting ripped off, the FTC, or the Federal Trade Commission, stepped in and it now requires all franchises to have a franchise disclosure document. And this document sometimes is hundreds of pages long. And what it basically does is gives the potential investor, the franchisee, all types of information. What they're going to get for their franchise fee, what their requirements are, what the restrictions are, how many businesses have been sold at this franchise, how many have went out of business, why did they go out of business. It gives you all the information you need to do your due diligence. So let's switch gears and go briefly to buying an existing business. So why would you want to buy an existing business? Well, it's a turnkey operation. When I sold my medical equipment company on July 31st, 2014, on August 1st, the new owners were open for business. So it literally took zero amount of time for them to open a business. They bought my existing business and not only did they buy all the products in it, they bought all the customers that I had already built up as loyal customers. They just bought everything lock, stock, and barrel. So it really is a quick start into the business. It's a reduction of uncertainties because my business was already proven. It had been successful for 2 years, and it was really had some success behind it. So it was a reduction of risk and a reduction of uncertainties. Perhaps you can get a business for a bargain purchase price, depending on why the owner might want to sell their business. Perhaps they want to retire. And this is one of the first questions you would ask. Why are you selling? So when I sold my medical equipment company, these two gentlemen who were also in the healthcare industry, they asked me, would I be willing to sell? And I said, yeah, I'd think about it. They knew that I was also teaching part-time. So they thought that, I might want to start teaching full-time. And that's basically why I sold the business, is I wanted to teach full-time, and I got a good price for the business. Acquisition of ongoing operations and customer relationships, and I already talked about that. So there's a lot of advantages of buying an existing business. And I think this is everything that we just went over. How do you find a business to buy? Well, first of all, you might want to figure out what type of business you'd like to buy. So identify your interest. The buyers of my business were already in the healthcare industry. They just wanted to expand their offerings by having a medical equipment arm to their existing business. But if you don't know, or you don't exactly, you're open to ideas, you might want to identify your interest and consider your talents. If you know nothing about cars and you have no interest in cars, it probably wouldn't be a good idea to buy an existing body shop. List some conditions for your business. In other words, write down how much you want to spend. Write down the location that you're looking for. Write down the size, how much annual revenue you're looking for. So that way you can sort of quantify your investment and then start looking for this type of business that may be for sale. You do your due diligence, which means basically you do all the research. But there are business brokers out there who can bring buyers and sellers together. So if you are looking to buy an existing business or you're looking to sell an existing business, you can go through a business broker. That's why you usually don't see businesses for sale in the paper. Usually you have no idea that a business is for sale, because it's not a good idea to put a for sale sign on a business. That doesn't bode well to customers. But you rely on professionals to help you out, accountants, attorneys, obviously, to help get the deal done. There's lots of due diligence, as I said, lots of research that you need to look for as you're researching an existing business to purchase. What are there contracts and lease agreements? What do I need? What am I getting into? So the owners or the buyers of my business actually bought my lease to my store, which I didn't own. I was just leasing the space. So they bought that as well. They had to look that over. They had to look at my financial statements and tax returns. And so most of these things are just common sense. Knowing who you're going to be paying. In other words, your employee roster, looking at the payroll, the organizational chart, all of this, looking at inventory, how much inventory there is. So all of these things need to be looked at when you're thinking about purchasing a business. Taking a look at the financial data. When you're valuing a business, how do you come up with a purchase price? Okay, so when my buyers came to me and we decided, okay, we're going to do this. Now we got to figure out a purchase price. What can we do? What type of purchase price can we come up with? We actually used a variation of all three of these. We looked at the asset-based valuation first, which means we listed all the assets of the company, my company van, all the equipment that I had, computer, cash register, shelving, display units, all of that. We listed those assets and wrote that number down. Also included in that was the inventory. Market comparable valuations, where you look at comparable sales of similar businesses. That was hard because we didn't have that. But let's say if you were purchasing a dry cleaning business, you might take a look at some similar dry cleaners that were sold in recent years in other areas. And then the cash flow based valuation. My new owners knew how much money I was bringing in each month, and there was actually a value to that. I wouldn't want to just give that to them. So they basically gave me one of the typical ways to do this is to look at either a 2, 3, or 4 year cash flow. So if my cash flow was $100,000 over every year, then I may say, okay, let's look at 3 years. That's $300,000, and give me 75% of that as part of the selling price, or 50%, whatever you've negotiated. You also want to take a look at the competition, the market, any legal commitments that are out there, product prices, the building that you're leasing or going to be leasing. All of these non-quantitative factors go into valuing a business. And then basically negotiating and closing the deal. And so that gives you a really brief overview of purchasing a business, an existing business, and franchises. That wraps up this chapter 4. There is no video review for Chapter 5, simply look over the PowerPoint slides that are in the Chapter 5 resources folder, but there will be no video review. It's a fairly short chapter, and I don't usually go over it in class. So Chapter 5, you're on your own for the video review. And then after you do that, you've got Chapters 3, 4, and 5 quiz to take after you've completed all the assignments. And there are no assignments for Chapter 5. However, Chapter 4, I do believe, has 2 assignments. So please complete the assignments, and then once you've done all that for Chapters 3, 4, and 5, take the Chapter 3 and 4, 5 quiz, and then you'll be able to proceed to Chapter 6. And we'll take a little bit more time in Chapter 6. It'll take us a couple weeks to go over that chapter. Okay, hope you're doing well, staying safe, and talk to you soon.